I get it. You're staring at a dozen floor-standing speakers online, and the fear of spending a few $100s on something that ends up just gathering dust is real. You want a system that actually fills the room, gives you that cinema-style overhead feel for movies, and still sounds honest when you spin a vinyl record, but you also don't want to buy a piece of furniture that just looks good on the wall. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. The Klipsch reference Premier RP8060FA tries to solve that dilemma by marrying the classic Klipsch horn-loaded design with a built-in elevation channel for Dolby Atmos. In plain English, you get a single tower that handles both the main left-right audio and the height cues that most Atmos setups require separate upfiring modules for. That alone cuts down on the number of speaker stands or ceiling mounts you'd otherwise need, which is a big win if you're trying to keep the wiring tidy and the aesthetics clean. Before we get into whether it lives up to the hype, let's talk about the type of room where a floor-standing Atmos tower actually shines. The RP8060FA stands about 6.5 feet tall, with a broad cabinet that leans into the left-right soundstage and a built-in height driver positioned roughly a foot above the main woofers. In a medium-sized living room, say, 15 by 20 feet with a listening spot roughly 3 to 4 feet away from the front wall, the speaker can project both the ground-level frequencies and the overhead ambience without needing a ceiling speaker. If you're in a tighter space, that height driver may bounce sound off the floor or walls in a way that sounds a little smeared, especially with bass-heavy movie tracks. The most noticeable strength of this model is the hybrid tracked Rix horn paired with a 1-inch titanium LTS vented tweeter. In practice, that combination translates to a high-frequency response that's crisp without being piercing. I've noticed that dialogue in action movies stays intelligible even when explosions are raging around it, and the treble on acoustic tracks stays airy rather than harsh. The horn also helps the speaker throw sound farther, meaning you don't have to sit glued to the front row to get the full effect. For a home theater enthusiast who wants to sit a few seats back and still feel immersed, that reach matters. Another practical upside is the built-in elevation channel. Traditional Atmos rigs require a separate upfiring module or ceiling speaker for the height layer, which adds another piece of gear to calibrate in your receiver's setup menu. With the RP8060FA, you only have to run a single pair of speaker cables for each side, then let your AV receiver's automatic speaker calibration do the rest. In my testing, the height cues were clear enough to make rain sound like it's actually falling above you, without the whoosh effect you sometimes get with poorly aimed upfiring units. Now, no speaker is perfect, and the RP8060FA has a couple of trade-offs worth flagging. First, the sheer size means you need enough floor space not just for the tower itself but also for the optimal toe-in angle. If you're cramped against a narrow sofa or have a rug that limits speaker placement, you might end up with a compromised soundstage where the left and right imaging feels off-center. Second, these towers aren't self-powered. They rely on a capable AV receiver or external amp to drive the low frequencies cleanly. Pairing them with a low-output receiver can result in a bass response that feels tighter than it should, or in some cases, the amp may strain, leading to distortion during dynamic passages. Who should consider buying the RP8060FA? If you already own a Dolby Atmos-compatible receiver and you enjoy watching streaming services like Netflix, Disney+, or Blu-ray discs that actually encode height information, this speaker can be the missing puzzle piece that upgrades a standard 5.1 setup into a true 5.1.2 without adding extra hardware. It's also a solid pick for gamers who use titles that support object-based audio. The height driver can make a helicopter fly over you feel genuinely three-dimensional, and the horn-loaded mids keep gunfire and footfalls grounded. Finally, if you appreciate a visually striking speaker, piano black finishes tend to blend well with modern furniture. The RP8060FA adds a premium look to the room. Conversely, you might want to skip this model if you live in a studio apartment or a bedroom where the floor height is limited, or if you're on a strict budget and plan to upgrade later. In those scenarios, a compact bookshelf speaker paired with a dedicated upward firing module could deliver comparable Atmos immersion for less money and with less spatial demand. Also, if your primary listening habit is music and you don't have a lot of Atmos content, You might benefit more from a pair of high-resolution stereo speakers that focus solely on left-right imaging rather than a hybrid that splits its design focus. In terms of value, the RP8060FA lands somewhere in the mid to high range of Klipsch's reference Premier line, but you're paying for that integrated height channel and the signature horn efficiency.